Hello and welcome to my presentation about scope as part of a software requirement specification. All of this is in the context of VCE Software Development, and this presentation is for my Unit 3 and 4 students, although I imagine that I'll be using it with my Unit 1 and 2 computing students as well. So, what do we mean by scope? Well, what we mean by scope is kind of like a boundary or a fence, and we're basically saying what's within the fence is stuff that we're going to concentrate on, and if you're on the other side of the fence, well, we're not going to concentrate on you. And it sounds kind of obvious and redundant, and we'll talk about that. So our learning intention is that students can explain what is in scope, what we mean by what's in scope, and the common sections of a discussion about scope. And our success criteria, if you were doing this with me in person, would be as below. So, when we talk about scope, we're going to be talking about what the major features are. Now, you might look at this and think, well, the major features, you could deduce that by going through the functional and non-functional requirements, and you could say, okay, well, these are the features that are going to be in there. And this is a recurring theme. You want clarity in your software development because particularly when you're doing a project of any size, and some of these things are huge multi-million-dollar projects, you want everybody going in the same direction. So you restate things. There's redundancy built into it, and there's agreement in that redundancy, so that everybody who reads it can say, oh yeah, I get it. We're doing this, we're not doing that. Very, very easy to lose money and focus. System boundaries, that thing I'm talking about, as what's in this system. What's within the fence, what's not within the fence. So looking at our image here, that's the out of scope. This is the stuff that's actually not going to be built in here. The stuff that's inside the cage, curious metaphor there, the cage, that's the stuff they're actually going to build. User classes, you're actually saying these are the people who are in scope. These people are going to be users of this. So again, that will probably appear elsewhere, but we're stating it again so that there we go, oh yeah, of course, you need to have, students who can use this. The assumptions, again, to avoid confusion, and the dependencies. What are we relying on? So, let's look at an example of this. So, this is a library cataloguing system. So, one of the major features is automatic cataloguing, that we're going to use the ISBN data and we're going to retrieve it via an API. Okay, well that's one thing it's going to do. It's going to have a student portal, and it's talking about those functions, and it's going to have a digital library. Okay, so if I come in and say, well, what about this? Well, is it in that feature set? Oh, and fine management, overdue fines and fee payments. The boundary here, like the fence, is what's actually in scope. Again, it's a restatement of it. Database management, librarian dashboard, student web interface. That's what we're building. We also say what's out of scope, because what we want to avoid is a lack of clarity and confusion and the kind of resentment and difficulty that builds up. So we're not doing anything to be buying books. This is not in this system. We're not doing standalone payment gateways, and we're not doing any social network features, because it's amazing what people will just assume is going to be in software, and the best way to get around that is not to have the assumptions, to say this. Now, I have had students sort of leap to being ridiculous and saying out of scope is that it can play Doom. Yes, you could spend all day writing what's out of scope, but this is intended not as comedy, but as clarity. So, if in doubt, it's either in scope or it's out of scope. The user classes, so in this case we're going to have a student class who can browse, borrow and read. We're going to have librarians who are administrative users and what they can do, and IT staff. So we know that when we start to flesh out those functional requirements, that we're actually going to probably have functional requirements under those three headings. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of redundancy and the interconnection between the ideas. We're going to state our assumptions. Now, assumptions by definition are sometimes hard to know that you're making an assumption, but we've got an assumption that the school provides consistent internet connection, that the librarians are using this particular barcode scanner, and that users possess basic web browsing navigational skills. Again, you can always go back and say, well, you know what, we didn't build it to work without the internet because we had an assumption that we were going to have a consistent internet connection. And dependencies. What do we have to rely on? So, we're dependent on the Open Library API. We're dependent on the payment gateway, and we're dependent on the school's existing authentication system. Again, this would appear elsewhere, but it is worth doing. Now, this is the bit where I would get students to write to me and tell me, why do we specify scope when a lot of this information can be found in the requirements and constraints? Now, if you want a second to pause and have a think about that, but I think that a strong answer is that there is an interconnection and a redundancy here. It want to be like a story where you reinforce ideas by hearing them again and again, but even more so. You want to make sure that A connects with B, connects with C. So it's okay that you're saying the same thing over and over again, because when you're going through it and testing it, you could then be able to say, oh, this is my scope here are my requirements, are these things completely consistent? Here's my constraints. Are these things completely consistent with these things? So there should be an interconnection. It might be helpful to think of it like the beams in a house, that the more cross beams you have, generally speaking, you're increasing the strength. So that's what a statement of scope is, how it's structured, and hopefully this gives you an understanding of why it's important.